You don't have to be an expert woodworker to make something awesome. I'm Wesley, and today Katie and I are going to show you how we made this Shadowbox table for our oddities and trinkets at a fraction of what they cost online. To start off, it does help to have a wife who likes to plan these types of things out. According to Katie's plan, the type of wood that we decided to buy for this project was 1/4 inch birch plywood for the bottom, 1x8 and 1x4 inch pine board for the sides and the lid respectively, and then furring strips which we later changed out for general purpose corner molding, which you will see why in a bit. We also picked up these pre-built legs and some 16x20 inch glass panes. Last but not least, every project needs a cat supervisor. But without further ado, let's get to building.
Welcome to our shop.
Hopefully it's encouraging to see just how minimalist our setup is. Here, I'm cutting the 1x4 inch boards at a 45-degree angle so that the lid fits together like so. Strategically, we mark out where the screws are going to go on the underside of the lid. They're going to be hidden using my father-in-law's pocket hole jig. Naturally, we ignored our original screw placement and went with the jig's default hole placement. Also, I'm not sure that there needs to be so many different types of screws because we've always just used drywall screws without issue. Regardless, here's a look at the lid so far. But we've already got some problems. Measure twice and cut once is not a rule that we live by apparently because the glass overlap here isn't right and is way too thin. We could just recut the wood, except you can't tell that a day has passed in between these clips and that I've already glued everything together. It's not an option to split the difference between the two edges because now the corner of the glass doesn't line up with that seam. We opt for the original thin edge option, so I mark out the glass and get ready to use my father-in-law's router. We have to set up this cutting jig with a level and clamps because even with as many tools as he has, he doesn't have a router bit with a bearing to control the cut depth. Once we're set on the line, it's time to gear up.
What?
You want me to actually cut on that?
Yes.
For a quick lesson, I observe a seasoned craftsman's finesse until
You'll see it. When I turned it on, it kicked out.
I like it. Adds character.
I might as well just go ahead and destroy this thing myself, but it's only fair to let Katie in on the destruction too. Once the parameter has been cut, we square up the edges with a little bit of chiseling. Carefully, the pane is dropped into place, and would you check out the glass on that? But there's a new concern. We started thinking about just how thin this glass actually is, and that one of these crazy cats might end up busting through it. For their sake, we decided to use plexiglass. At least now we can fix that thin edge issue from earlier, and it helps that plexiglass is super easy to cut and snap. With Katie coming through in Vanna white form, it's a perfect fit. Moving on to the Shadowbox, it was a bit tricky because of these octagonal legs. I made this template with scrap wood to help me fit the legs and sides flush like you see here. The first cut is just a simple 45-degree angle off the end, but the second cut is definitely a bit sketchy. To keep all my fingers, I make the last cut with a chisel. Once I make the same cuts on the other side, this is a nice little visual at how it will fit together. I thought it would be easy to glue and assemble this thing upside down in one go. That was not the case, so I had to glue the legs in one at a time and hope that nothing shifted out of place when I let go. Once dry, I reinforced the corners with brackets. Of course, when I go to add in the last side, things aren't really lining up too well. I'm going to blame it on the thickness of this wood not being the same as each facet on the legs, but I feel better at least knowing that Van Gogh would have my back on this one. Sanding the leg attachments flush really helps to hide the issue, so now it's time to add in the bottom. This is the corner molding that we traded the furring strips out for. Their L shape will be perfect for holding in the birch plywood. Each piece is placed flush with the bottom and screwed into place. Since the table isn't perfectly square, it's flipped upside down on the plywood and the inner parameter is marked. Watch carefully as I demonstrate how to use a lawn chair as a sawhorse. The bottom fits in quite nicely. I'm satisfied with my work, but more importantly, so is my supervisor. Now it's time to patch up our mistakes. To do so, I'm using black epoxy sculpt, which is a two-part mixture that acts like a putty of sorts. It's hilarious because the contrast of black really goes to show you how much we've messed up. Once dried and sanded, it's on to staining. This is one of my least favorite parts because I feel like so much could go wrong. Like this weird dark spot. Not sure what caused that, probably my fault. Or this corner that looks like it's been scorched. At any rate, the fumes are clearly getting to Katie's head, so we take it outside the next day to finish up with a second coat. As bad as staining is, adding polyurethane is the literal worst part. Amateur tip, if you want someone to know that you made a piece of furniture, just make sure to seal in as much DNA evidence as possible. We've done a good job of that at least. It's finally time to line the inside of the Shadowbox. Katie is using project foam, some beautiful crushed velvet, and some decorative trim that she got at the fabric store. She starts off by cutting the foam to fit the inside and then uses that as a template for cutting the fabric. The foam is stapled in place and the velvet is neatly tucked and stapled as well. Once the excess is cut off, the trim is delicately hot glued into place. It's finally time to put on the lid. The first thing I did was screwed the hinges down into place. From there, I tediously measured all the sides to make sure that the overlap was as even as possible. Once satisfied, I used a dry erase marker to indicate the location of the hinges on the bottom side of the lid. Then I screwed the hinges into place. We ordered these little bumper strips online, and I used those to place in the gap between the hinges as well as on each corner. Before installing the plexiglass, we carefully mask off the edges to protect from the adhesive. For this, I'm using silicone in a squeeze tube and careful not to glob on too much. Each pane is delicately lowered into place and pressed firmly around the edges to create a tight seal. We also ordered some corner guards online. Unfortunately, you can't find any plain ones as thin as the wood that we have. To solve the overhang, I simply make a cut and use a pair of pliers to bend in the edges. Although now the fit is nice, the newly cut corner creates potential for injury, so I simply round it out with a file. This table is really starting to look nice, but an interior light would take this thing to the next level. We picked up some remote controlled LEDs at the hardware store, but of course, white would not be a very good option for this table, so we mask it off and then hit it with a coat of matte black spray paint. How'd that get there? A few command strips are placed on the back and it's installed underneath the center support of the lid. The last order of business is to add in some strange items. For now, Katie is creating an arrangement with deer bones, dirt dauber nests, and balsam poplar sticks that I found on vacation in Montana. Katie and I are extremely happy with how this project turned out, and we think the table itself is as much of a conversation piece as the items within it. The stained wood is rich and warm and complements nicely with the soft velvet and trim on the interior. Overall, this table has a real vampiric sort of vibe about it. There's a quaint sense of dark elegance that it adds to the room as a unique and functional work of art. If you've enjoyed this process, I'd like to invite you back next time while I make strange things.